Everyone, welcome back. So, like I said in the intro, we have someone here today that I've known at a distance for a while, someone that has definitely been part of lots of things that have been really inspirational to me. Great creator, great business person, and someone that I think is going to share a lot of cool insights. Chad, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, man. I definitely appreciate you having me on. It's an honor to be at least included with the amount of guests that you've had. And, you know, I don't know when this is actually going to come out, but congrats on 100 episodes. I think that's really cool for sure.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I would be remiss if we didn't point out the shirt you're wearing.
Ah, yeah, that's actually one of my favorites. I like it.
Yeah. So, World Be Free.
Mm-hmm.
And what right over beside me is a Berthold City release. So mutual friend, total homie, friend of the show, Andrew Klein. We love you, man. And you want to give any shout outs on anything about Andrew related?
I think anything Andrew related, you can pretty much, if you're in the hardcore scene at all, go within arm's reach of anything that Andrew has been involved in. So definitely, I mean, we've been friends since we were kids and definitely come up in the scene uh, through decades now. And he's, laid his mark on a lot of things.
Yeah.
We had a record label, multiple bands, getting involved in production. Like, he's crazy, crazy dude, but I love him.
Amazing guy, for sure. All right, but let's focus on you. So, for the uninitiated people who don't know, who are you and what do you do?
My name's Chad Peterson. Some people know me as the bass player for the band STRIFE. I am also a music industry executive. So I've been on the promoter side of the music industry for about the last 20 years or so. And pretty much concerts has been what I've done.
Okay. I really want to tuck into that because I think people understanding the behind the scenes of how that whole world works is really valuable. And also, like, I'm super interested, like, how do you do like proper business while also staying true to like creative process, all of those things. But I want to start with something that you may or may not have thought about before, but I'm interested in your take. So we've been part of a scene that's like the hard punk and hardcore scene. It's this like little microcosm where a 17-year-old person can put out a demo and suddenly they're traveling the world and they're like basically like a superstar. You and I have met a lot of people who got a level of fame quite young when they were very, very young. And that could be really, really good for people and it could be really bad for people. One of the things that I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention is that for anyone who doesn't know, Strife was and is a really important band for the punk and hardcore scene. And in its heyday, Strife was like a huge band and you were super young. So here's my starting question. How did those initial experiences of being in something that was legitimately big, that legitimately got you touring all over the world and where there was like actual money involved and like actual spotlight, was that something that was good for you or something that was challenging or kind of both in both categories?
It was interesting in a lot of ways because we were coming up in a time when touring around the country and around the world was a lot harder now. I mean, a lot harder then than it was now. We didn't have access to technology back then. We had road atlas and some sense of direction that has seemed to gone to shit over the years thanks to technology. But it was trying to call home and stay in touch with family at that time. It's definitely a lot harder, and being exposed to something like that at such a young age. I mean, we started this band when we were like 15 years old, and yeah, I'm not going to date myself here now, but it's a long time ago, and we kind of built our scene in our local area from where we used to drive anywhere from an hour to 2 hours just to go see any band, whether it was Instead, Chain of Strength, Outspoken, Sick of It All if they were in town. And no matter how many shows they were doing in the Southern California area, if they were playing San Diego, Riverside, Long Beach, and then maybe the country club in the valley, we would go to all of them. And it was that much to where you could show up at a show and basically everyone was your friend. When we started, venturing outside of California and outside of Southern California specifically and heading towards the East Coast, it's funny because we recently did the takeover shows again for the East Coast and we played in Buffalo and two in Philadelphia. And some of our friends that came out to the Philadelphia show were friends that were actually at our very first shows on the East Coast in New Jersey back in, I want to say it was like 91 or 92. And we were talking about that time specifically and how, we've stayed in touch through the years, and how everything is just kind of like, in one sense, right, it's grown to the point where it's a lot bigger. Like you used to be able to go to a place like Middlesex, which was iconic in New Jersey for any hardcore show that used to happen back then, whether it was Burn or Mouthpiece or whomever. And that place would be wall to wall packed. And I remember our first show in New Jersey at Middlesex, and it was fucking packed. And now it's kind of like you can go and play New Jersey as a hardcore band that might have a name behind you, and there might be like 75 to 100 kids there. But it's distributed in such a way now that there's definitely a lot more eyes on what it is that you do, but it almost seems as if not enough bodies are coming out to see what it is that you do. Hardcore shows back in the day used to be huge. I'll tell you a funny story. I was out in California recently playing a show, record release show with Terror, STRIFE was, and we were talking with one of the older bands on the bill, and I was having a conversation with him. I'd never met the guy before, and it's really, really great dude that I got to know through this conversation. And we kind of just used to talk because the shows that we used to play used to be a lot bigger. Like we used to drive around to places like Connecticut and play the Tune In, and we all came from a similar background. We were playing shows at like Irving Plaza back in the day, and making just enough to get from city to city on guarantee and merch alone. And there was never really like any money in it for us back then. It was pretty much just struggling to, that when you left your city, you were leaving your job if you had one, and you might have to put your stuff in storage because when you came home, you wouldn't have a place to live. And then you'd have to come home and find a new place to live for a month and a half until you go on tour again. So it's definitely a struggle back then. And I was talking to him about the fact that we both came up in a scene where shows were a lot bigger. A lot more people were coming out to shows. It was a lot more of a mixed crowd. You would have punks, you would have hardcore kids. Everyone would be there to see, the same acts and come together under the same message to the music. But, hundreds of people would pay to see these shows, and we'd be getting paid like $100.
Oh,
and
where did all that money go to?
That's what I was telling them. I was like, when you go back and you think about it, knowing what we know now about, playing like more reputable concert venues, like, a lot of the shows that are happening today are at venues that have a lot of history, facilities that have a lot of history in them. And they definitely have a name behind them and a well-known promoter. And it's kind of like you're making a lot more money now because they're charging, anywhere from like $13, $14, $20 at the door. But back in those days, it's kind of like, wrap your head around that. Go back and watch like the One Truth video or DVD, whichever it is that you have or wherever you stream it on, and take a look at how those shows back in the day used to be, with immense onstage dog piles and just people crowded everywhere. And just kind of think like, who really came up in this? It definitely wasn't us, or any of the other bands that we knew at the time that were out there busting their asses on the road to try to at least play these songs for people and stay on the road. But nowadays, it just seems like everything has gotten easier. It's almost like it's gotten easier and distant, like more distant at the same time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like, I often say that Sick of It All was the first band that figured out how to do it professionally and still be cool. Like they figured
Absolutely.
out that they figured out the business model that allowed them to stay relevant, legitimate, super cool, down to the roots, but also make a living out of it. And it's almost like everyone has replicated that, and then it's grown and improved upon itself, and the internet, but they were the initiators of really figuring it out. Up to that point, it's just like a bunch of people being like, oh, we got $100, that's amazing, but there's like 1,000 people at the show and you're the headliner. What are you talking about? But hey,
Yeah,
I do want to get right back to the initial question, because I think I want to make sure we capture it.
Sure.
Was being in such a big band, and huge respect for STRIFE, for everything that you did and continue to do. You were a big band and you were very young. How has that impacted you as a professional? So like, was that good for you to get that kind of early success? Was it challenging for you, or was it kind of right down the middle?
I can't say it's ever really been either, because I never really looked at it that way. To to measure the success to me wasn't about the amount of people that were coming out to the shows, or it was about the people that actually like understood what it was we were doing at the time.
Mhm.
And sure, a lot of people would come out to our shows and it was great, and there was a lot of energy there. And as a performer or anyone that's doing a band, we thrive off of that. Like, we thrive off of the crowd reaction. And if the less that you're actually reacting to what we do, we actually will go harder just to try to, get that point across, that we're here as much as you are to get this done. So I think professionally, to kind of like hone in on the question that you're asking, and um, it's helped me at a level to achieve where I'm at today, because I can appreciate both sides of the coin. I can go into any venue in the world, and I've done, thousands of shows, and just kind of work with anyone from the house staff to the promoter from an artist point of view. And I could also look at it from their point of view as well. And that started for me at a very young age. It's kind of what gave me the acumen about getting into the music industry. Was I already understood, one half of what was going on in this business, and I was approaching it from the artist. And what was always important to me was being able to have an artist come in my room and feel that they were at least understood and respected as an artist, not as if they were just here to play another show in another day in another four-wall venue. So professionally, it started me off on just a real path of growth and understanding the music industry from the start. Didn't matter if it was how to break down a guarantee or look at any sort of like settlement numbers at the end of it, but also looking at being 18 and actually legally old enough to sign your first record deal, and understand that you were never going to see a dime off any album that you ever did on Victory Records. That's fine. You understand that. You're not going to get rich off of that shit. But at least going through those motions and understanding the business has set not only myself, but a lot of people in this industry that I know and respect down a path to where, they can look at some sort of void that might be happening and be able to fill it in a way that looks out for the artist, which has always kind of been like the most important thing for me in general.
Yeah. I love what you said there. And like, so the applicable lessons and the strength of that early success, it's what kind of launched you to start your career. I want to hit on something that I think is, I always reflect on. So if I'm coaching a CEO, or I'm working with an executive, almost in 0% of their stories are, yeah, when I was like 17 or 18 or 19 or 20, I played in this band and toured all over the world. And like, I put out records that people still rep today. And like, it's, people, if my band played a show, like 1,000 people would show up. I can't think of any time that's ever happened. And their success, their like kind of big game, their band has been their career. Right.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
definitely.
and, and maybe some of them had some sports or something along those lines, something they did. Uh, when I meet people who have had really early success and have done something that's been like life changing, basically, I find that it can have, either it sets them up, like with your story, where you're like, oh, like actually just kind of help me figure out how do I take what I've learned here, and then how do I transition that into a career? Or it could be them just basically trying to like recreate those same conditions over and over again. It's like that kind of like that high school sports star who never quite got over being on the football team. It's like, oh yeah, I did that band. Remember, I was in that band. I did that band. It's like, and they just kind of like spend their life not excelling into other areas, and then just get stuck in this one early success. Everyone I've met from STRIFE, I only know the two of you, but everyone I've met from STRIFE, like, you had legitimate success when you were young, and you've been able to parlay that into doing other things while also staying connected to punk and hardcore. That to me is like the best case scenario of someone who has young success. They're able to be successful. It teaches them about a bunch of stuff, but they know where to put that into place and then bring along those lessons and apply it to other spaces. And that, to me, that stands out about your story.
I think so. Thank you. And, you know, even for what you said, it was, if you look at, most of the guys in the band, it was even, Rick just started like carrying around a camera. Now he's a professional photographer.
Yeah.
Andrew pretty much looked at every angle that he could find within the hardcore scene and started a record label, started a merchandise company. He's done tons of stuff just to kind of like stay busy and grow his brand. I never sought out to do this, to be, completely forthcoming. It was always kind of like, me figuring out what was going to be next in my life and how to stay on track in order to keep myself on the road, because Strife at the time was such a band that we were kind of like supposed to stay on the road for a specific amount of time every month, just to be able to tour and tour and tour and go from city to city, country to country. And that was great. But at the time, it was like, how do I fill my downtime at home? And then when we stopped doing the band for a brief period of time, it was like, oh shit, what am I going to do now? Like, I don't know what I'm going to get into. And that really, more than anything, kind of like started to launch my actual life career path. But it started out through like a long, drawn out span of like finance and then sales. And then one day getting into the music industry once it was around like '05 or '06, once the mortgage market started to, collapse. So at that time is when I really started to set my sights on getting into music and staying within that industry for, the greater longer term.
Yeah. All right. So tell us, I'd love to hear your path into how you've gotten into what you do specifically, but can you just give us a sense in your day to day, like, in whatever role that you're in, what does your day to day look like? What do you do specifically?
Sure. So right now I do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I recently left my last position, just wasn't the right fit. And it's just kind of about knowing when to go, I think is the most important thing.
Yeah.
I was reading a funny thing the Hard Times put out the other day about how Paul Rudd stays young, and one of them is not having a job that you work 60 hours a week and it's completely soul sucking.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I'm at now. Right now, I'm just kind of like trying to figure out what the next actual logical path is going to be, but something that's not going to keep me as busy as I was before. So my normal day to day when I was doing facilities and shows, at one time, when I would say at my busiest, I was managing, 3 different rooms in Los Angeles at one time, doing over 500 events a year. And that could be anything from concerts to special events or private events where we rented out the room to anyone that wanted to come in and do anything they wanted. All of it just combined and rolls up to the top of the event count. So anytime throughout the day would be, come in, check your email, definitely like schedule yourself out, but pockets of time and being able to, know when to get back to emails and when you need to like start looking at the rest of your day and the rest of your week and be a little bit more proactive than reactive is something that's essential to what I was doing at the time as a GM. I never really stayed that involved with shows or touring acts that were coming through the room. I didn't even like it when people I knew played the room, because that would be like a little bit too much like away from my day. It's like, I didn't want to be like, oh man, if something goes wrong, now all of a sudden I'm affiliated with the venue that Chad from STRIFE manages and we played there and damn, had the worst time. No, I want everybody to come through and have that sense of anonymity in their bubble and just kind of like come through and have the best time they can, playing whatever room it is I'm in at the time that they actually come through. So day to day was always just trying to stay ahead of the next thing. Like if I'm at, a show on a Tuesday, my sites are already on Wednesday. That show on Tuesday is already going to happen. Like my team's already taking care of it. I already took care of that show on Monday. So knowing like, how that show is going to perform, how the final numbers of that are going to be, I'll spend the first like, hour, 2 hours of my day looking at that stuff. And then I'll spend like a good chunk of my day just trying to get into new business, figuring out like what new sales are coming in, what do we have lined up to get us through the rest of the year. My sites are always kind of like how to, either meet or exceed whatever my budget goal is for that year. And fortunately, I've done that throughout the span of my career while I've been in facilities. There's only, I would say, a few times that I've come up short throughout the years. And it's, a lot of that is definitely being able to step back and own what it is you weren't able to have the foresight on at that time to see where you might have been able to make up for that shortfall. But over time, it's just about like trying to stay in front of whatever might be coming up for you, Yeah.
So like for someone going to a show, let's say, your average person's going to a show, they're focusing on the band, but there's like the band is a part of it, or the event, whatever it is. The event is a part of making a good experience. Mm-hmm. There's all of this stuff in the background that matters, especially from a facility point of view. And I'll talk about just from being a touring musician, like The difference when you play a venue and they've got it all lined up and they know what they're doing and they're cool is so much different. Like I always think about the auto bar in Baltimore. It's like when I was touring a town, it's like I loved playing the auto bar. The staff were cool. They would like, you'd chop it up with them because they were like nice people. They were fun to talk to. You
Oh
felt
yeah.
appreciated no matter how big your band was or how small your band was. They treated you well. The sound was cool. The room was cool. Like that, I can always remember the auto bar and how much I love that venue versus the millions or hundreds of venues I've forgotten the name of. I just remember it was like a shitty experience. So like what goes into running a great facility and creating that great event?
You know, your experience coming up to however you set your night out, um, it starts from the moment that you walk up. It could start from the moment you park your car, depending on how that experience is. And it's important to realize that something as little as knowing where you're going to park your car and whatever facility it is that you're going to at least communicates that to you in a clear manner so that you know whether or not you're parking in a place that you should be able to park, whether or not your car is going to be towed or ticketed when you come back. Um, we've always had a very strong community presence in any facility that I've been a part of. And from you walking right up to security at the time when you enter the room, I don't even really like to refer to them as security. In my view, they're guest services. You're not really there to secure anything. They're there to make sure that, you know, at least things are relatively happening okay. But as somebody that is responsible for everybody that's in these rooms, I never really want anyone to put themselves in harm's way. So, I mean, most security people that you look around at any reputable venue, they're not really like security. They handle more like guest services. They bring you through the line, they'll check your bag, they'll walk you through, they'll answer any questions you have. But I mean, they're not really like trained in hand to hand combat. So they're not really like securing much of anything.
Right.
Um, they're just there to make you feel a little bit more safe and make sure that you have a good time. So I've always kind of like looked towards our opening band is, you know, they're there to do a show as well. They're there to play with the headliner at their request. And we want to get as many people in that room to see that opener as we can. So if we have a sold out show and there's like 1,500 people standing in line, which it's rare, but you know, let's say there's like 300 people waiting outside, the rest of them will come up throughout the night. And we want to get those people in as quick as we can. So their experience is going to be like, I was in quick enough to see the opener. I was at the bar quick enough to get a drink before they went on. The ease of service that they're able to get through throughout the night. If they have to go to a ticketing window to pick up their ticket, just making sure that that's an experience in itself that they can look back on and be like, oh, wow, that was really easy. I just showed them my ID or I showed them my QR code and was able to get in, you know, super quick. The overall customer experience is kind of what's going to make or break your room. It just really is about, you know, your overall experience as somebody that's going to a show. Like, how would you want to have your event go, or how would you want your night to go? And it really is about just the ease of the process of getting in the room, the ease of, you know, being able to get to the bar and get a drink and definitely like move about the room, everything right down to the sight lines, the where you can go to take yourself away from an event while it's going on. If you don't want to see a particular band at that time, like, does it have a good place to, you know, just kind of remove yourself and hang out? It's everything that goes into something like that is just being able to kind of like tailor whatever your thought of a good night experience would be at a show into whatever facility it is that you're a part of at that time. And sometimes you have the room to work with it, and sometimes you don't. I mean, I was fortunate enough to actually manage a great venue like the Fonda in Hollywood, which had great sight lines, great ease of access, great parking, a great outdoor space, just nice outdoor patio to go and like hang out and still like watch the show as it's projected on the wall. And then I also managed something that was like about the size of, you know, just let's just say not that big, down to a 500 cap room, and it was the Roxy in West Hollywood, and I gave you nowhere to go. And it was hard to get into, and it was really hard to move around the venue and get a drink. So sometimes you can only really like work the best with what you have, and you realize whatever the shortcomings are that you have within whatever facility it is that you're a part of, and you try to make up for those in other places so that people have a much better experience than they thought they would coming out. And sometimes that just comes down to whether or not it was like how you were greeted and whether or not you were told to have a good night. and just recognized as somebody that's a guest in your facility at the time.
Yeah. So how does a facility develop a relationship with its audience? And like real specific, like we know a band develops a relationship with its fans or whatever we want to call it. And I keep thinking about Turnstile because Turnstile is so prominent right now. But you think of like a band from like how they play, their merch, how they do interviews, all of that is like they build a relationship. They're expressing themselves. But their ability to do that also hinges on having a venue. And sometimes you see a show in a venue, you're like, oh, awesome, that's going to be great. And other times you're like, oh, I have to go to this crappy venue. So, like, how does a venue develop that kind of relationship with an audience that is where people actually want to be there?
I would say it's just kind of like knowing where you suck.
Mhm.
There's a bunch of venues that bands play at time and again that are absolutely horrible. And it's not that the audience really wants to go and see them at this particular venue. They would rather not. They would go see them at any other place. But it's just because of a relationship that a band might have with a buyer or a promoter that they end up in this room time and again. And a lot of times, like, the band themselves hears the fan and knowing that they shouldn't play, they're like, God, why are you playing that place again? You really need to play this place. Or um but it's just knowing that, like, hey, if you have a sound system that isn't up to snuff and you have a band coming through that is going to sound like shit in your room, sometimes you need to go to your higher ups and say, like, we need to spend the money and get better sound, or we need to take a look at our room and figure out like where we could acoustically measure a lot better. Or maybe we would be a lot better of a room if we took out, like an entire back row of banquet seating and was able to expand our floor out a little bit so people had a lot more of a comfortable experience. um, a lot of times it comes down to a couple things, and I've touched on one of them already, and that's guest services. A lot of people hate interactions that they might have with people that work in concert venues, nationwide, worldwide, whatever. It's just like you have to look at it like you're there to see that band and that night. You want it to be great because you love this artist. But the people that are in that venue do this no less than 200 times a year, and they're tired. They've seen it 100 times, and they can do great shows or they could do some real shit shows. And honestly, I've done some real shit shows over the years, but it really is about your attitude and how you portray your interaction with that guest when they come through. That really is going to make all the difference. It could come down to, yeah, I don't really like the sound at that place, but they're so nice, or their drinks are reasonably priced, or I'm not paying $20 for a pint of beer. There's a lot of things that do go into it, but listening to your audience, and especially when you're in a neighborhood and these people come out to your venue all the time, you have to listen to what it is they're telling you or their feedback. And you also have to take a look at what other venues are doing across the country. Like, what sets you apart? How are you different? What makes you better? You mentioned Auto Bar earlier. It's a great example, but you would be hard pressed to have any touring artist that comes through your room that's not wearing a sweatshirt from the Metro in Chicago or the 930 Club in DC. And it just comes down to like how they treat their fans and their artists that come through the room. It'd be nice to have cupcakes every night. I'm not gonna lie to you, but I can't eat them. Um, it's a great perk that a lot of these people give bands, and that's what gets them coming back to the room, is the memory of the time that they had there. It's the same thing with the fan. If they had a great experience there, I'll tell you, I've done shows where people have come out to see a band together and that was their first date, and then they've come back like 2 years later and they're getting engaged, or they want to come back and have their wedding there, or they met at a show and they've just recently had a baby and they're bringing that child. I've been in this business for a long time, and they'll bring that kid to their first concert at your venue. And that kind of just all circles back to, well, I think we're doing something right because our fans are genuinely liking the rapport that we're building with them, not just because of the talent that we bring through, but because of who we are as a room.
Yeah, man. And this is like why one of the reasons I was so interested in talking to you is like entertainment, of course, like the bands matter or the show matters, whatever it is that you're going to, but it's like one part of it. And someone who runs a facility, like whatever size room, there's so much that goes into it about having a relationship with the consumer and having a relationship with the community. Because we all know like venues can have like beef with their neighbors, all of that. It's like such an intricate balance. Um, So a question that I have for you, because like you're talking about like, hey, you got to know where you suck, but also a venue can't be everything to everyone, right? Like, so for example, I imagine different kind of acts have different kinds of fan bases who want different things from a venue, a different kind of experience. So like, is there kind of like a magic, like really these are the fundamentals that every act has, or is like, or that every experience has to have, or is it kind of like you just got to know where you suck and work on it and keep getting better and better?
I've been fortunate enough to work with promoters that understand a lot of the times that the fan is going to drive your business.
Mhm.
I recently left my last position, just kind of not being able to use one of the reasons that I actually left it was because I wasn't able to use the experience that I had in getting um, a lot of this off the ground. And it comes back to what I said earlier about knowing when you just have to leave and it's just not going to work out. So um, with having a specific method of how you market a show and how you know that we got a band and that's great and this is going to be a slam dunk sellout, and then all of a sudden you're looking at ticket counts and they're just creeping and creeping and creeping. Sometimes it's got to do with the fact that your room might be the problem, or you're not reaching these people through the right marketing methods. And I've worked with some really great teams over the years of people that were able to, put a show on sale and get the word out of the fact that, the Shins are coming through and that's going to go like that, or Hot Chip is going to sell every ticket in this venue within, 15 minutes. And then recently going to do a Hot Chip show and it took like 3 months to get over 400. And you're like, what's going on? And it just really has to do with the fact that your room actually might be the problem in that case. Fortunately, I've been in really good positions before where I was able to kind of like navigate that a lot better and say, like, you know, this is the sound system that this venue might be using right now. Maybe we want to come in and get our room retuned and start looking at the sound system for our room or different types of sound to get people in here. We've had very talented people that have been on our teams over the years that have been able to come in and be like, yeah, this is probably like not the right sound system for the room. And anything from like, rock bands, indie bands, hip hop, EDM, whatever that's come through the room. It's just been a measure of knowing what our system is and being able to know whether or not we would be able to serve what that band needs. There's been times that bands have come through the room and they've been like, we want to bring extra subs. And it's like, do you even know our system? Do you know what we're able to offer? Why do you want to bring extra subs? This is 1,000 people. Like, we cover 1,000 people on a nightly basis, and you want to bring in subs that would amount to a small festival. It just doesn't make sense. And it is a level of knowing that communication, that respect that you might have with an agent or an artist at that point. Just be like, that's not really something that you need to do. Trust me, come out. Maybe we'll invite you out to a show so you can see a similar act and you can judge for yourself whether or not you need to do it. I mean, at the end of the day, the answer is going to be no, because my neighbors will kill me. But you need to understand that regardless, your show is going to sound good.
Yeah. Well, you went to where I'm real interested in. So, like, we've talked a lot about having the right kind of relationship and some of the fundamentals of having a good experience for the audience. But what's the leadership side of it about building the right relationship with artists and like especially managing like crazy egos, like people who want like wild things, or people maybe who are underselling themselves, aren't are like making their stuff too small. Like, where's, from your perspective, the roles of you've been in, what's the gambit that you've dealt with when dealing with artists, and also like artist representation, which I know can be nightmarish?
There's a couple different ways that I could actually address that. And I could start from early on in my career when I started out doing the legal and contract side of things, um, which is an interesting story because I came into it not knowing anything about contract administration or negotiation or anything that had to do with an artist contract or writer, other than what I'd known from my own experience as a touring artist, or what I might have heard on, like, the Smoking Gun website at the time about Van Halen's writer and how crazy it was.
Yeah.
That is not really a real world experience for what we do. And a lot of the times, a lot of those crazy requests that might be in a writer, like, we want all green M&Ms or whatever have you, is just basically to see whether or not the promoter is paying attention to what's in the writer,
Right.
and actually reading it. So my first experience in actually having to go back and forth with anybody through any sort of contract, in this particular scenario, was with Elton John's agent.
Mhm.
And he had never, in all the shows that he had done with the company that I was a part of at the time, ever had any of his remarks redlined, reworded, and returned to him and expected to sign it.
Mhm.
So at the time when I came on board to do this, I was given like a brief crash course on contract administration. I looked at some boilerplates from all the major agencies, be it William Morris, CAA, whomever, and kind of like took what I was able to digest from these contracts and writers and put it into his agency writer, which was his own independent agency at the time through an agent that he's been with throughout his whole career. And he called up, and basically the line was, "What the fuck is this? And why did you do this to my contract?" And I kind of had to start talking to Elton John's agent about whether or not what they're asking for is reasonable. And you're putting 100% responsibility on the promoter. Whereas if you're the artist and we're the promoter and we're in this together, some things are actually at, an equal level. So we really need to work together on this and reword this a little bit, because some of these things, they're not our problem, but you're making them our problem. And he's like, no one's ever actually brought that up to me before. Okay, so let's agree to change these things. And this was within my first like 2 weeks working at this company. And it's something that I will carry on with myself forever, because he's a world known artist.
Mhm.
And it's something where within the 2 weeks of the company, I was able to achieve something just by having a conversation that no one else had really done before, purely by accident. I was just doing what I thought I was supposed to do. And sure enough, I was able to kind of like carry it on from there. But it was able to go on and work towards working with other agencies on bringing a lot of their contracts back into their regular standard terms and conditions that they send out with every single agreement that they have, and bringing it into, okay, let's work up something between us and you, so we don't have to go through this every time. And we'll set down these boilerplate terms and conditions. So most artists that you have that come through here, this is what we're going to agree to. This is what we're going to send back to you. And a lot of the time that rapport comes from, a little bit of a promoter agent relationship or a bigger promoter agency relationship, knowing that they want to play your room. But at the same time, it has a lot to do with whether or not you're going to be able to get them to agree to what you're saying. And that's a lot of the negotiation process that goes into it. Now, I wasn't a buyer at that time. I was just merely the guy that marked up the agreements and sent them back to the agency and was able to, get them returned in time for the show. But it's something that we were able to grow on over time throughout the years that I was in this role and able to do it. So I think that kind of touches on a lot of your question in building the rapport and being able to do things like that. But a lot of that also stems from relationship. Like, there's just a lot of different reasons that not even bands will play with certain promoters. They just know that they might be playing with Live Nation, or they might be playing like AEG, and they specifically just play with these promoters from city to city, and they don't really understand basically why, other than the fact that they're getting paid to do it. But their agent has the relationship with the buyer that may span decades that they don't even know about. And I've been fortunate enough to work with buyers that have been in this business for so long that they have relationships that date back to the first like Bruce Springsteen shows. So there's a lot that goes into that kind of stuff, for sure.
What about the community though? So you got a room. It's obviously like it's somewhere, and you're going to have neighbors. And neighbors could be other businesses. They could be apartments, it could be houses, but also like the actual community it's nestled in and the city that it's in. So how does like someone in a role like yours manage that kind of relationship?
Um, it's difficult. I'll be honest with you, especially in a lot of the times with working with a lot of facilities that are just nestled in neighborhoods. They carry sound, and a lot of it is they're hearing a lot of the same concert that you have going on in your room. And you do the best that you can to really kind of like stand between your room and that neighborhood. And then there's times that you're just not really going to be able to. And you have to understand that you're going to have to take those hits every now and then. I've worked with people that knew what type of act it was that they had coming through their room, and they knew who the problem people were in the neighborhood, and just be like, look, just so you know, I've got this artist coming through the room, and I think that if you'll let me, I'll put you up in a hotel for the night. I'll pay for it. You guys can get out of there for a little bit. You can enjoy that, and you won't have to deal with listening to this. um, I think you'd be surprised that a lot of those are few and far between. And it's I've had to deal with it a lot in one of the rooms that I was managing for a good amount of time. But you really just have to get ahead of it. We would share our calendar with everybody in the neighborhood and just let them know who's coming through. A lot of times they do their research. A lot of times they reach out. They'll write back to us and be like, "Hey, this guy's a known crit," and you're like, "Well, yeah, he is, but that doesn't make him a bad person. It just makes him a crit. That's fine." Um, it just has a lot to do with your relationship with them and being available and being able to talk through it with them. I've sat in a number of community meetings. I've listened to a lot of the feedback from our neighbors in our neighborhoods, wherever we were at, and just really been able to establish a line of communication that's like, this is my phone number. I'm always available. If you have a complaint or a concern, reach out to me and we'll work with it. I've gone so far as to trimming the bushes of residential building that was behind one of my venues, because not only did it save them a few $100s a month, it just made them more tolerable to be around, because honestly they were a real pain in the ass for us trying to do business in this room at the time. And just little things that you're able to do to make any situation better are definitely like what you have to be willing to do. It's not really like a tug of war. It's not really like, if you go up against us, you're going to lose because we're a major company. No, it's really about the fact that, and at the end of the day, my reputation and our reputation as a company will lose. Our reputation as a venue will lose because we're looked at like assholes, but we're not assholes. We're actually nice people. We're just here to bring, entertainment to this neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, there's one more layer that I want to get to, and I want to be a bit sensitive how we talk about it, but like so far we've unpacked something that like just I hope anyone going to a show anywhere will have kind of a renewed sense of like, hey, it's not just about having a good relationship with the neighborhood, with the people who live on the street or the people who live on the block or the community or the city. It's like all of that, going from like knowing what the regulations are to like maybe like literally trimming someone's bushes, managing that. That's a lot. But then it's about the relationship with the artists, both on the legal side, giving them a good experience, like being able to do that the right way, knowing when to set boundaries, how to like push on things. And then also there's the like, oh, you just have to have a cool venue that runs well. It's easy to access, has to have good parking, you got to have good through lines, got to have good sound. There's a ton of complexity, but let's go to the last piece that I'm real interested in. What about when it's not your room? You don't own the room. There's owners. They have expectations. They want things done a certain way. So how does someone like you manage that when you've already got these three other types of relationships that you're working with?
The relationships with the owners have always been something that's sensitive and complex. And at a lot of the time, it's basically come down to, you know, how personable you are with these owners in general. And they can be very big personalities, um, or they could just be some people that own a property and are in it strictly for the money. But they like the perks that come along with it, like being able to, get 2 tickets to any show that they want to see, whether it be like Metallica or the Strokes. It doesn't matter to them. They're cool to be able to hook themselves up or whoever it is that they want to get tickets for on that night. um, it doesn't really fall back on them in terms of a lot of liability, because we would work to shield them from a lot of the things that happen as a result of being present in the room at the time. Um, just as a complete hypothetical, if something like a riot were to happen at a show, or the name of the venue gets dragged through the press, our side, as far as communications go, would try to shield that ownership from as much blame, because at the end of the day, they're really not to blame for anything. All they do is lease us the property.
Right.
But we do our best as far as a communications level to keep anyone's name out of it altogether. Like, there's very few people out there that could tell you who actually owns the El Rey,
Mhm.
and they are very private people,
Mhm.
but they really just own a building that, the company I worked for at the time happened to lease and did a number of concerts through all the years that I was there. Now it for all intents and purposes, it's a world famous room,
Mhm.
and everyone that's come through that room, whether it be like Kanye West or Justin Timberlake, has some affiliation with the El Rey Theater, but no one can tell you who the owner is.
Mhm.
But you might know that the owner of the Roxy in West Hollywood is Lou Adler, because there's documentaries about the venue, and he is a very well-known public figure and producer throughout the years. So um, that kind of goes back to some of the people that might be the big personalities that you might have to work with whenever you're working through a room. And there are expectations that you do have to manage, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, they're kind of like is a mutual end to what everybody's doing. It's, we do concerts, we'll write you a check at the end of the month, or we'll pay you for the year. But overall, if we have a long-term lease on your space, it is strictly mainly just a landlord leasing type of relationship.
So this is a complex business. And like, I mean, most businesses are complex. Yours seems real complex. So what keeps you in the game? Why are you passionate about it?
I love it, to be perfectly honest with you.
Mhm.
Um, it's something that I've always been in and around. I mean, we all go to concerts. We all know what type of experience we want to have. Like, kind of what keeps me in it and doing it is just figuring out like what the next step is. It's crazy to think that I've seen bands come up all the way from like a 500 cap room to an amphitheater, or I've done, and I say I as a much larger group of people, not like me solely. I've done this. It's efforts of a lot of people, but U2 and a Roxy in the Roxy Theater holds 500 people, where we had to shut down Sunset Boulevard. Metallica in a room that holds 1,200 people. It's a number of concerts that can be anything from you're watching the next biggest band, but you don't know it yet, to a band that you've always wanted to see that you get a reunion show for that's just like insane, and it's going to be great. But it's not all great. Like, it's a lot of hard work, and it's a ton of hours, and it's a lot of time away from your family, and it's a lot of side looks whenever you want to take a vacation. It's dealing with personalities of people that just don't understand a lot of times what reality is, and the nature of like how to talk to people or do good business. It's, you know, at the end of the day, it's just kind of like what I am, it's even in this brief period of time where I'm kind of like apart from it right now and trying to figure out what it is I want to do. It's everything else almost seems like, yeah, I can do that because I've been doing this for the last 20 years. It may just be packaged differently.
Mhm.
But I already have experience in most of the things it is that whatever job I might be looking at calls for. It just has a different name, you know?
Right.
Um, but it's hard. And I'm definitely taking this time to reflect and think about what it is I want the next chapter to be, because I don't want it to be like short term. I'm getting way too old for that. And this last beat it was cool, but it wasn't where I wanted to end up ultimately. So I'm really kind of just taking this time to figure out, you know, what it's going to be. And I think it'll be good. We'll see.
Yeah. Um, so throughout all of this, like all the years that you've been doing this, what have you learned about yourself that has benefited you? So like, what's something that you've learned about yourself? Like, oh yeah, this part of my personality, this has actually been really helpful for me in this world.
Um, Sometimes it's really important to just understand what your instinct is
Mhm.
and to go with that.
Mhm.
Sometimes the formula that has been set out over the years may not be the best possible thing for what it is you're encountering at that time. And it's always going to be important for you to speak up and not stay silent about what you think might be the best move to make. I've spent a lot of time, wondering whether or not things that I'm going to say will land me unemployed. And I think, it's a lot harder to fire a person from what they say. It's, your opinion may at sometimes not be the best or may not be valid. It's kind of like what what Walter was saying on the one you sent out yesterday. I was like, no, it was like what you think sucks, and I will do everything I can. But there's someone out there at least saying that, and it's important to get your voice out there. I've learned a lot more to speak up over the years, and through the time that I left my last employer to my previous one during, when everything shut down because of COVID, I kind of came back into it thinking that, yeah, I've definitely like taken this time and grown as a person, and I wasn't going to let a lot of like things that I experienced in my past direct how I was going to be going forward. That was an opportunity for me to change and for me to grow and now not be a part of what I was before, but actually see how my time within that organization helped me grow to kind of like become the person that I am now.
Um, so what is something in your personality, something about you that you've learned, actually, I need to work on that to be effective in here?
I'm crazy, honestly. Something about my personality that I need to work on. I can be a giant procrastinator.
Mm.
You know, it's not one of my best qualities, and I know it's definitely something that I have to work on. Uh, it's cool because one of the things about, not only like you said it yourself personally, but the name of your podcast too, the band that you're in, everything represents change and represents growth and
Yeah.
represents like new opportunity. And I think that it's important to not only cover the fact that, sure, like I've had a long career in the music industry. It may not be like what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life, but it's definitely shaped the person that I am today. But it's the ability to encounter, accept change, and grow that actually is the foundation of what we do as people.
Mm.
If we stay stagnant and just keep doing the same thing over and over again, it's just fucking insanity. But yeah, in terms of like me personally, I can put anything off to the last minute that I just don't want to deal with. I can give you 1,000 examples from my personal life to my professional life.
Uh-huh.
And it's, as I keep moving on into like even this new role, I have to look at what I was doing previously and how am I going to grow from that to make myself even better in this new role. So
Mhm.
I don't always look at like leaving one opportunity to encounter another as moving from role to role. It's always got to be like a constant elevation. There's been basically every role that I've taken on throughout the experience of my career has been a step up. So it's been, from like contracts to GM to multiple venues. And it looks like we might be a little bit lagging on the internet. Is that you getting that?
I got you now.
Okay.
You said constant elevation, and from that point, it started getting spotty. But you're good now.
Yeah, let's start dropping bands that Sammy's a part of.
Word up to Sammy and Vinny. A fan of both.
So I think that growth is important.
Uh-huh.
You don't want to find yourself into something that it is that you can't do or bite off more than you can chew, for sure, because you don't want to be unsuccessful. You just want to keep going out there and growing in a positive way. But you always have to grow and you always have to learn. Those are important things. And I'm always learning every day from, it doesn't matter like if it's a professional thing or something that my wife's telling me. There's always just a constant level of growth that I might be encountering within my life.
Um, all right, let's get into some like more practical things. So let's talk about delegation. Like in your roles, like there's just a ton of people involved. Like there's so like I'm even thinking like when you talk about bars, it's like Jesus Christ, like like even like a bar back. Like there's so many things, and not that you would be directly responsible for those, but like it's an organism that is like got so many pieces attached to it for people having a good experience and a band having a good experience. So, um, what have you learned about delegation and how to like properly delegate? Coming up in punk bands, you do everything yourself, right? Or like you kind of have your band dad or whatever it is. But at some point, that's not, you can't replicate that. You have to delegate. So, what have you learned about delegation and how have you gotten good at that?
Well, I think that um, in terms of what delegation is, essentially, it just kind of like it empowers your team.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a manager, it's always been important to me uh, to know where anyone on my team wanted to end up in their career.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always been important for me to just kind of recognize the fact that if someone's an assistant, that's not a long time job. That's not what they want to do for the rest of their life. It's like, tell me where you want to be and how I can use my experience to help get you there. And through the course of doing that, I will not only be able to mentor, develop, and train you, but I'll also be able to delegate certain things that are going to be essential to you in what it is that you want to take on as you go forward. Not only the fact that you're going to be learning those things and getting the tools from that, but you might also find out through the course of doing that 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 isn't what you want to do. And you can take that and be like, well, that didn't necessarily end up where I want it to be. Let's try this now, and see how that goes. And I'm willing to work with anybody that I think genuinely wants to be there and be a part of it. There's any number of things that I can put out to anyone that's working with me. The important factor is whether or not you want to be a part of it and you let me know what it is you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you anything to help you get there.
Yeah. How did you learn your like mentoring and coaching style though? Because that's like a pretty, it's an interesting thing. So like I view delegation as a huge part of like freeing up my time so I can focus on things, but giving people like the spotlight, giving them stretch, like stretch assignments, all of that. How do you like, what's your philosophy of the way that you approach mentoring or coaching people? Because like in your world and what you do, your leadership has the ability to like totally set people on the path or to treat them like just kind of like a cog, like a gear in the machine.
Sure. There's been a number of people that I've worked with over the years that might have started out as assistants at a venue that are now GMs of world class, theaters.
Yeah.
And it basically came down to what did they want to do? What could they take away from what it is I was doing day to day? There's a positive outlook and there's a negative outlook. And there's part of it where I've worked with people that have been like, well, if I'm doing X, Y, and Z, I question what you're doing with your day. And it's kind of going back to them being like, well, what I'm doing with my day isn't important. What I'm doing with my day is running this facility. What you're doing with your day is not only the expectations of your job, but anything else additionally that you want to do that'll help you grow. It's not really, if you're focusing on me and what I'm doing with my day, then that's not giving me the best look at what you're doing with your day, because it just seems like right now I'm already looking at you like you're disgruntled.
Yeah.
Like, but I feel that with, being able to just know where it is that Dave wanted to be and where I've wanted to be, like things that I wish people would have done for me as I was growing. I've been fortunate enough, and I say this a lot through this conversation because the reality is I have been fortunate enough to work with people that have kept me included in things that um, they've been doing over the years and just kind of had me around to absorb what it is that they've been doing And it's almost like, sometimes an osmosis thing, just being that close to somebody just almost rubs off on you. You just like pick up the nuances of being able to buy a show or work with an agent or talk to somebody just based on mannerisms and personality. But if I wasn't fortunate enough to have somebody see something in me early on, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. So I've always kind of looked towards people that I felt had that same quality, so to speak, and how we might be able to develop that. And I've been wrong. Don't get me wrong. Like I've hired, some real assholes and some people that just, weren't worth a damn at the end of the day. But I've also been lucky enough to hire and mentor great people that are also great friends now that in turn I learned from going forward. Some of them hold positions now, over what it is I was doing with them at the time. And I'm constantly learning from them and I'm impressed with what they're doing.
Oh
And
yeah.
I think that definitely has led me down the road towards, it's just, I can't say that, outside of what people have done for me in the past, it's been something that has gotten me over that hump to be able to start mentoring and developing. I just think it's important because a lot of the people that I work with, they become friends. You spend
Mhm.
anywhere from 8 to 13 hours a day with them.
Yeah.
And the reality is, if you're not keeping them engaged and involved, and if you're not growing, you're going to lose what could possibly be a great person to somebody else
Mhm.
that sees something that somebody else might be able to give them instead of retaining them.
Mhm.
And, outside of the fact that there's the obvious human factor, there is also the monetary factor where it's like, do you have any idea how much it costs to onboard somebody, to hire them and actually like get them up and running? And
Mhm.
you're just going to piss that away and let them walk out the door because you don't want to deal with them? No, you need to grow your employee. You need to get them to the next level. You need to mentor your future managers.
Yeah. One of the things I've been encouraging businesses in the past year or so to move off of is like payment. Like, everyone's like, oh my God, the great resignation. I'm so sick of hearing about the great resignation. It's like, you give anything a tagline and like the news just wants like clickbait. So they're going to be posting these things. Yeah, of course people are resigning. And I think it's like a pretty predictable thing. Like the economy is a mess. Like there's huge inflation. People want to get more money for their time, like really practical things. A lot of roles are kind of like chronically underpaid, all of that. But the thing that I really encourage people is like, don't play like the money game. Know that you're first, make sure you do all the work to make sure you're paying people the right amount, but never chase people, like never chase people with money. This is what I firmly believe, like why people stay in jobs or why people leave in jobs. And it's like it's a hierarchy from like top to bottom. The number one reason that the number one thing that keeps people in jobs or gets people to leave is their relationship with their boss, but not whether or not they think their boss is a cool person. It's about, does this person invest in me? Do they mentor me? Do they coach me? Do they give me stretch assignments? Do they give me the spotlight? Do they give me real, actual feedback? Not like good job or like, oh, shitty job, but like real feedback. Like if something's good, why is it good? What's the impact from it? That's the number one thing that keeps people in a job or gets them to push out is their relationship to their boss. The number two,
100%.
well, but it's funny though, because people think like, oh, we'll just give this person 30% more, 20% more. It's like, well, no, like I want to know what did I do wrong as a leader that would get them to leave or like what didn't I do? Um, the second thing is people's connection to their team. And again, not whether or not their teams are their buddies and they're like they hang out, like that's cool, but more so, does the team they're on help them do the best work that they've ever done in their career? So does the talent that you have around this person enable the best work they've ever done? Or is it like, do they create blockades? Is it like hyper politicized? Is it like, do they feel like they're outside of the group? And is there bullying? Is there any of those things? If you have a team that allows someone to do the best work they've ever done, ever, and they've got a good boss, it's so hard to get someone out of that company. The third thing people care about is whether or not they actually like their job. And that's like, I know that might sound weird, but it's like you could have someone working at like a paper bag factory and they might be like, yeah, I don't love what I do. I do like accounting at a paper bag factory. Like to many people, that might sound totally lame, but to someone who has a great boss who's really invested in them and a great team, they'd be like, yeah, like I don't care. I'm growing a business. I don't care about what it is. It's that we're growing a business. But the last thing that I think people actually care about and that actually keeps people in their job is how much they get paid and what the benefits are. And benefits also include like work-life balance. People really respect their boss and really feel invested in. People do the best work they've ever done with their team. The actual liking the day in day out of their job and then the how much they get paid are moot points. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't care about those things. But I see all like people in the work world chasing this, like, oh, we got to pay them more, we got to give them different benefits. It's like, whoa, how's your leadership and how's team culture? Those have got to be the main strike points. That's where you invest money. That's where you do the work. And I hear this in your story where it's like, where you're like, if someone comes as an assistant, I want to see if I can get them to my job or higher. That to me is cool. That's real leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And like, don't get me wrong, there's days that working for me absolutely suck.
Yeah.
And I'm not always, the best boss, and I don't pretend to be.
Mm-hmm.
And to circle back and touch on what you said a little bit there, there's working at a paper bag factory does not sound at all that bad. Like
Mm-hmm.
I days that I would love to do that.
I know.
But at the same time, it's can I do that? Yeah, I'm sure I could do that. I might actually look into that. But I think that everything that you said, level wise, through every number that you said there, it hits everything kind of like right on the head. And there is a lot of importance there. And I've had people where it just actually comes down to money, and that is what it is. Or there is an important, or what's the growth opportunity? Growth opportunity is huge. If there's nowhere that you're going to go, then you are absolutely going to start looking at other places. But you need to realize that some of your best potential candidates are already working with you. I've been doing this too long, but there's so many people that I've just seen that started out, as fresh as green as they can be
Mm-hmm.
in an organization, and now they book festivals. It's just not only the amount of time that somebody has spent with them to make sure that they could get to that hump, but the amount of faith that they have in themselves to be able to do it, the amount of ability and time spent developing those relationships with those agents to be able to put that amount of bands in like an entire weekend, but also the ability to block everybody along the way that just doubted you or wanted to talk shit about you because all of a sudden, you wanted to be a talent buyer or you wanted to be a ticketing manager, and just knowing in yourself, like, well, whatever, I can do this. What you have to say is kind of like stale at this point. I'm going to do this. This is my life. And I'm not going to let the words that you're telling me right now determine how I'm going to shape my career, or maybe I shouldn't. If you truly believe that you can do it, then by all means, get out there and do it. Pick up the phone and start cold calling agents and managers and being like, hey, I've got this club and I want your band to play here. And a lot of times it may come down to money and whether or not you can actually like get that band in the door. But not shutting that person down is 100% going to be what makes them stay with you. Your ability to encourage them and have them grow through that is, like I said, they'll just take it somewhere else.
Totally, man. So then my next question is, and this is like, I'm very interested where you go with this based on the uncertainty of the past few years, specifically in your industry. How's the stress of the unknown challenged your leadership? And I am interested in general, but of course I'm really thinking about the past 2.5 years where like so many live shows basically shut down. So how is that stress of the unknown challenge your leadership?
It just is what it is, man. At this point, it's kind of like, and the hardest part about navigating those waters was when it first happened.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that we've taken from that experience and brought into what we do now and how we operate it's just night and day. When it first happened, it was the hardest thing for me to try to even find things for my staff to do.
Mm-hmm.
Inevitably, that's why we ended up with furloughs and layoffs, and myself included. It was a hard time. I started making work from home diagrams on how we could best, utilize you're sitting in a chair versus sitting on a floor or working in your bed and passing those out to the staff. And when you're in the live event industry, there's nothing worse than no shows and nothing to look forward to and absolute uncertainty. However, it provided me with my, I would say, best opportunities, and, you know, kind of like to get up off my ass and get out there and venture into the unknown a little bit. Like, there was nothing really keeping myself or my family in California at that point. So we decided to pack up and move to the East Coast, which is now why we're based out in Philly. Um, there was a point where you realize that whatever it is that you wanted to achieve in Southern California, if you didn't make X amount of dollars, was not achievable. But that opportunity exists in so many other areas with great people, great opportunity, and, you know, just like, we could move to Philly, we buy a house, versus not being able to do those things in Southern California. And just being able to have that opportunity now, was because of the pandemic happening. Now, opening up a brand new venue in a very competitive market, which is something that I did last November, and doing 100 shows, from going like from 0 to 100 from November 4th through May, um, was also very challenging because it allowed me to explore things of myself that I'd never really done before. Getting into more or less like the project management and construction and development and building a team absolutely 100% from the ground up in a market that I had zero experience in, um, was something that I think only shaped me as a manager for the better. I don't, it's funny because I know a lot of this is kind of like leadership and development. How do you mentor? I don't look at myself in any of these capacities whatsoever. I'm just a guy that happens to have these jobs that cares about the people he works with. And part of it to me was, it's funny. I was having this conversation with my wife earlier today where, um, a scene that somebody might be involved in or a business might be involved in should never be a reason that you want to work there, because it's something that's always going to leave you kind of like disappointed at the end of the day. That's why I was so fortunate enough to work with so many varieties of acts over the years and get to know so many things, from like genres of different like hip hop agents to metal agents to indie rock agents. Um, there is such a thing as like too much of something that you're into, and variety is what you definitely need to keep yourself around. So I look at the whole uncertainty of where we were, I would say, months ago versus today. Um, I really hope that everyone just kind of like took that time to realize where, one, we need to prepare, and we need to prepare for the inevitable. Two, we really should have taken that time to grow in terms of what it is that we are doing, what we could be doing, and what we aren't doing to be better. And I admire a lot of people that just decided to, check out at that point and pivot into whatever it is that they're doing now, because I'm sure that they are 1,000 times happier, and definitely took what was happening through those that long span of absolutely nothing, instead of just waiting, and took that destiny and just decided to jump into doing something else. Whatever it is, I don't care whatever it is you wanted to go do, as long as it makes you happy and kept you busy through that course of time. I mean, I must have applied to 1,000 jobs. That's an exaggeration. No one's applied to 1,000 jobs. Maybe someone in the comments later will say I've applied to 1,000 jobs. I have no idea, but hundreds to no reply, or to, you look impressive, but at this time we're going with somebody else. And that's cool. That's great. That just means that this isn't the job for me. And it's times are challenging. It's what it is. Everyone out there right now is almost fighting for the same thing.
Um, so let's talk about like being responsible. And, I think everyone's like, the idea of accountability, especially now, like,
Oh,
accountability
do
is
you
such a,
do you have another guest coming on?
what do you mean?
A responsible guest?
Oh, no. Well, I want to talk about like, I want to back into this in the right way. Growing up in punk and hardcore, you grow up with a lot of personalities. Like you come up with, I think it was best said by this dude Matt that I know. He was like, punk and hardcore is weird because you come up in a scene that's full of people that found that scene because they didn't fit in anywhere else. And not everyone, but like a lot of people, it's like maybe their personalities were too big, maybe they were outcasts, maybe they're too shy, whatever it is. You grow up in this scene where it's like people have challenges, maybe they're damaged, maybe this and that, and they come into this little microcosm where they're just like that to each other, and Walter said it perfectly last time. He's like, hardcore and punk is like the saltiest of salty scenes. And one of the things growing up in this scene I've always marveled at is like you meet a lot of cool people that are lifelong friends, and you meet a lot of people who are like, you are horrible, but I've learned so much about dealing with people by dealing with you, this horrible person. And it always makes me think about accountability, like, and what you bring from punk and hardcore into your world. So what do you like, what's your perspective on leadership and accountability? Like basically, like, how does not like taking accountability for yourself, how does like copping out of things make you a shitty leader?
I mean, who among us hasn't tried to blame something that happened on some other thing to try to make yourself look better?
Totally, totally.
Um, and there really is just, sure, maybe the person that you're explaining that to already knows the deal. Maybe you're trying to make yourself look better, trying to gain some ground by throwing somebody else under the bus. Um, the whole deflection part of it, more or less, is just a mechanism to make sure that people don't think less of you just based out of whatever situation has arisen. Um, as a leader, as a manager, whatever you want to call it, uh, you have to be able from time to time to take the fall and display that you have a level of maturity to deal with whatever mistake or oversight is happening. And I've, like I said, well, among us hasn't tried to deflect the responsibility or the blame to somebody else. It's human nature to just be like, oh, well, this, that, and the other thing. But in terms of the accountability portion of it, you're going to have a lot more respect for somebody, whether or not, they're going to take the blame. There might be something that needs to be handed down because of it. I've written up a lot of people over the years. I've let a lot of people go. A lot of those people come with excuses. And a lot of it has to do with, I don't know what you're talking about, or that's never been me, or I've never done that. Cool. But you really are going to have a lot more respect at the end of the day for the person that just goes, you know what, that was my fuck up. I did
Uh,
that and I'm sorry.
can I share a story with you?
Is that rhetorical? Of course you can.
So the reason I ask this question is like I reflect a lot on my experience growing up in punk and hardcore, and then how I try and be a boss. And I try and bring the best parts of what I learned in punk and hardcore into being a boss, while also like really understand like what shitty parts of my personality existed beforehand that I got to work on,
Mm-hmm.
and what shitty things that I learned as a result of being in a punk and hardcore band that I've kind of like, oh, this is the way people operate. And when I became a professional, I had to like unlearn a ton of stuff. Some of the stuff I had to unlearn because it's just part of my personality, and some of it's like things I learned in punk and hardcore. And one of the things is like van dynamics, tour dynamics. When you're in a band for a long time and you tour a lot, and very specifically, I can remember, I was like the band dad, one of the bands I was in. I was kind of like the band leader, I guess you'd say. And people ask me a ton of questions all the time because, yeah, like all the information, I held all the information. At the same time, I'd always be like, fuck, well, I'm fucking sick of being like everybody's like, it's before Google. I'm like everybody's Siri, like everyone's asking me. And not only you have one person asking, you have like 5 people asking you the exact same question at different times every single day. You're repeating yourself constantly. And it's like every single day, it's like a weird Groundhog Day kind of thing. And I remember one time I was in Australia and I just was being a total prick I was like, I just created this whole situation. And at the time, I was just deflecting and blaming everyone else. But I look back on it and I'm like, oh, that's just like poor leadership. Like it's just someone who's put themselves in a leadership position, won't accept that being part of that role is this, and is acting like a total fucking asshole. And the reason I bring it up now is just like when I saw this on this list of questions from Spencer about like being accountable, it's like being a leader isn't just to be about being accountable to your day to day and like not deflecting. It's also about being like, well, no, if I've chosen to be a leader, I've chosen to be in this role, I've chosen to have reports and be in this space. I have to be accountable to the kinds of interactions I'm going to have, the kinds of ways that people are going to hit me up, the kinds of responses. It's a much different thing than just playing a part in an organization. Being a leader is really about understanding yourself and being accountable to your own reactions, including the shitty sides. And so I was interested in your response on that, because you have been in a serious band, you have torn, you understand van dynamics. So like I wanted to know like where your space was, like personal accountability, and how you manage that in regards to your own personality.
I do the best I can. I can't really like nail down too much of what it is, but I've been friends with the same group of people since I was a kid, since I was in high school. And the whole dynamic of, like you say, like the band dad or even van dad at that point has at one point in time run through a good few of us.
Mm-hmm.
But I've kind of at times, especially early on, went along with a lot of what we were doing. I would almost say it blindly, which what kind of crazy person picks up their life and decides to go across the country at 18 years old and just put everything else aside with his friends? I mean, it is what we do. It's kind of like a lot of we do we really like each other that much? I don't know. But it's we did, you know, we definitely spent all of our time together. And you know, a lot of the stuff that we did from a touring aspect was booked, you know, by us out of a bedroom, by calling up venues and promoters.
Mm.
And just, I mean, if you want to talk about, you know, doing things yourself and just a whole DIY attitude of it, it was about, you know, people that were in my band getting off their ass and doing things.
Yeah.
And then that got us, you know, the shows. Then we needed to figure out how we were going to get there. Like, we didn't have money to rent a van. We didn't have money for gas. We didn't have money to buy food. We didn't have money to call home. So we had to call bands that we were friends with and, you know, for essentially network when we didn't know it was networking, and start asking them to like borrow their van. And they're like, yeah, but we're coming with you. And we're like, fuck, all right, cool, let's go. So all of a sudden, you know, like Strife and Undertow are driving out to the East Coast together in a van that doesn't have windshield wipers, and it's in the middle of the winter. So I think for what we were doing a lot of the time early on, it was trial by fire.
Yeah.
Was how we were doing it. We just got out and did it. Like you said, sick of it all, kind of like laid the foundation of how bands did it and did it right. We followed some of that, and they were definitely like, you know, good friends of ours as we were, you know, coming up and starting to play like more and more and more. They, you know, took us out on a couple tours, and we're eternally grateful for that. But, you know, we've, as a band, we've made a lot of mistakes along the way in terms of like, you know, shows that we maybe should or shouldn't be playing, or decisions on tours that we were doing at the time. And it just came down to us being able to, like, you know, take a few hits and move on. And it just is what it is. Your ability to move forward and pick up and move on from that is kind of like, you know, what keeps you going and what drives you. It's like, if this wasn't fun, like if I didn't love these guys as much as I do, or everything's kind of like reciprocal. If they hated me, or, it's like we didn't get along at all, we wouldn't be doing this band.
Mhm.
And the main reason that we still do it is because, you know, we're essentially, brothers at this point. It's like I've known these guys almost as long as I've known my own family.
Mhm.
And there's just, a respect and appreciation, and there's just this kinship that we have there through what we do. So yeah, we realize that maybe even at almost 50 years old, picking up and flying across the country to wherever may not be the best idea, when you have, a family and kids at home. But it's also your only opportunity to really like hang out and see each other as much as you would like to, even more these days. So it's still fun, and we still love these shows, and we still love playing these songs, and definitely like seeing the bands that we get to get out on the road with and spend time with, the friends that we see and meet up with out there. So um, I think that the mistakes that we made along the way, and being able to grow from those and remain accountable for things that we've done, have kind of put us in this unconventional band that we are now.
Yeah. And I love what you said about like, hey, sometimes you make some missteps and you recover from them. And you can only like forecast so much and guess so much before you actually just are like, oh, we screwed up. We have to do something. So that brings me to one of my final questions. What's the balance that you strive for between being reactive versus proactive as a leader?
Um, there's only so much you can do, and we try to be as proactive as we can be. So anticipating problems before they occur um, is something that in the business that I'm in is it's key. You have to be able to do it, but you're always going to have to react to what goes on in your environment around you. So you do need to be able to walk a fine line between the two, and you cannot be afraid. Let's say like you're being as proactive as you can. All of a sudden, your boss calls you, or even in a lot of cases that I've been through, my boss's boss will call me
Yeah.
and start running down lists of things that I need to react to. And you can't be afraid to, speak up or get in front of what it is that they're saying with like, yeah, I understand what you're telling me right now, but I'm dealing with this whole other thing. Like nothing at the end of the day is going to destroy your world any less than not speaking out in terms of like what it is that you need to get done.
Mm.
Putting things off, like I said, I'm a giant procrastinator. I don't pretend to be otherwise. It's 100%. I will put things off to the last minute all the time. Sorry, I realize that, this whole question comes down to being like proactive, and I try to be the best that I can in terms of doing it. But there's only so much that's in your control, and you are really reliant on your overall environment. You need to have that ability to block out time. You need to not be disturbed through certain hours of the day while you work towards other things and think about getting things done. It's like I said early on in the conversation, when Tuesday show's happening, I already dealt with that on Monday.
Mhm.
I'm already on Wednesday. I'm looking forward to Friday, and I'm dealing with the problems that come down from there. Am I looking at doing, U2 shows with shutting down the streets in the city? Do I have all the permits that I need? Am I that proactive enough? Oh no, my boss is calling me and wants 10 tickets to the show that I only get two to, and all of a sudden, like my focus is on that because I'm afraid that my job's in jeopardy because my boss needs tickets. It's like, okay, first of all, that's a weird example because my boss is never going to need tickets. So I'll just show up.
Right.
And, but I mean, you get what I'm saying. It's kind of a thing where you need to be able to work with a degree of predictability rather than knowing that you're going to be proactive all the time, because that's just not going to happen.
Yeah, man. And I love what you said there. In the industry that I'm in, there's a lot of like leadership tropes that just kill me. And I get it. I totally know why people say this stuff. It makes sense. But like, one is like strategy eats culture for breakfast. Oh yeah, really? Like, okay, first of all, I hate that. It just drives me nuts when I hear people say that. It's like, or sorry, I said it the wrong way. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's what I meant to say. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Like, yeah, okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
great. Everyone wants to work in a cool culture, like for sure. At the end of the quarter, when your company's not performing well enough, you're not over there like beating the drum about culture. You're like, oh crap, our business strategy's off. Like there's these like really obvious kind of like lacking in depth statements that people say that make sense. And one of them is like, I really want to move from reactive leadership to proactive leadership. Yeah, that's cool. Like, again, like, good for you. I look at leaders being able to really be able to be like, yeah, I've got good solid planning. That's part of it. But your ability to, like, in the moment react to something in the appropriate way, to be like, hey, thanks for bringing that up, but I can't focus on that right now because that this number of tickets you might want, it matters. And I don't want to get fired for saying no to you, but I actually have to focus on this instead. Not just managing in the moment the thing that you have to react to, but also managing the relationships with people who might be distracting for you from what you need to react to. How you handle that unexpected, how you handle that moment, that reactive moment where you have to focus and get things done, but also manage relationships, is ultra key. And I'd say both matter, like, and they might matter equally. Planning, being active, like proactive, really knowing what's laying out there, but also how do you keep yourself and others whole and focus on the things that you need to in that moment of crisis.
Yeah, I was reading something the other day that said reactive personalities don't have initiative, and I couldn't agree with that less. I
Yeah, I
think that
totally.
it really is a matter of your overall environment, and
Yeah.
it's about you know managing whatever it is. It's being able to with whatever's put in front of you.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. That statement sucks. Um,
Yeah,
I
totally.
think that in even what you were saying about culture each strategy for breakfast,
Oh God, I hate it.
cool. I realize that by saying things like I'm a procrastinator. Look, man, I'm just being honest in terms of like who I am, in terms of whoever might be watching this, whoever might want to take whatever iota of anything that I have to say from away from this conversation and just give it like a sense of realness to the point where, look, I'm not a great leader. I'm a terrible planner. I am, at the end of the day, like just a human being that has taken my own personal career of whatever achievements you want to call them, from sitting in an office doing legal and contracts and reading over um, agreements for bands that I never thought I would even see on typed on paper, all the way up through doing, thousands of concerts later. And I'm not going to say that 100% of that has been by my doing or my design. There's always chance, and you always need to take into that consideration that things may not go your way. There's any number of people down the street, wherever in the world, that could probably do my job and can do my job 1,000 times better than I can, but they'll never get that opportunity because they aren't exposed to maybe the world that we come from, or didn't have, the means or ability to come up where we came in the world. And it is a matter of circumstance and chance that makes these things possible. And they will always work 1,000 times harder than I have in my life. And I respect them immensely for doing that. But I'm not going to say like, hey, the where I've ended up in this world is because of where I am. It's absolutely a product of people driving me to do this. My wife, developed me, my personality and my business acumen into being a better person. But at the end of the day, it really just has been like, one day I got a phone call and was like, hey, why don't you come in and do this? And it was like, yeah, cool. I'm literally not doing anything else right now. So it's the middle of the afternoon. I'll go give this a shot. Bam, I'm in the music industry.
Oh yeah, man. All right. So as we're wrapping up, I got three questions for you, and
Yep,
they're tough. They're tough questions.
I'm sure.
One of them is going to be super easy though. Uh, Anything you want to hype up, promote, or let people know where they can find you?
I mean, I am on Instagram at Chad Strife.
Mhm.
LinkedIn is Chad J. Peterson. It's Peterson. If you ever want to reach out to me, you can definitely find me through there. As far as hyping up goes, I'll hype up you. I think you're fantastic and great.
Thanks,
I
man.
definitely love the podcasts. I love the
Thank you.
band. I love what you do, and your LinkedIn presence, as far as like trying to keep people going and understanding, what leadership and growth is second to none.
Thank you, man.
So I applaud you for that. Um, And yeah.
And then STRIFE. I think we got to mention STRIFE. And, you know, again, for some people who are listening who like don't, you know, they're not from punk or hardcore, I'd say I remember being a kid growing up and like loving like Judge and all these bands and being like, God, I wish there was a band. Like all those bands seem to disappear, you know? And I was like, I wish there was a band like that now. And then I found out about STRIFE and I was like, this is the band. And when I was a kid, although we're like within the same age group, like STRIFE was such a huge band to me. And I remember ordering like STRIFE gear from like Victory Records. And like when I was wearing it, I was like the only kid in my town that would have a STRIFE shirt, and putting it on like it was like a statement about life, like, you know, about where I put my flag. So like huge gratitude for you and everyone in STRIFE for what you've done and what you continue to
Thank
do.
you.
So everybody check out STRIFE. Very, very well worth your time. All right. Second question, difficult, very hard. What's next for you? And I know you're thinking about that yourself, but what do you think? Where do you think you're going to go next?
I have no idea. And that's kind of the best part about it. I was when we were doing these shows recently in Philly, I was talking with Joe Hardcore, and he's someone that, you know, been in circles with for years, and we kind of always talk about like music industry, and absolutely always this is hardcore, and we've had kind of like a very long relationship of just a lot of mutual respect there. And he's like, so what are you going to do? And I'm like, I have no idea. He's like, I fucking love that about you, man. He's like, I love that. And he's just like, you're going to get out there, you have no idea what you're doing. I'm like, I don't know, you know, I could absolutely land anywhere. I honestly, as long as it's something that is not a 60-hour-a-week soul suck of keeping me away from my family, and has decent amount of time for me to travel, because we do love to get around and go different places and travel. I do a Instagram for travel as well called Travels with Chad, and it's kind of like some inaccurate travel information, if you will, where kind of like go somewhere and I will get some things right about something, and then one thing that's just very wrong about where it is that I'm at. But that's something you could check out also. But yeah, I don't know. I don't care. I just will definitely take my time figuring it out. There are some irons in the fire, but I will definitely update you with where I land.
Heck yeah. All right. Last question. Maybe it's easy, maybe it's hard. 3 most important artists for your development as a professional. And this could be maybe their output was important, maybe what you learned from interacting with them important, maybe they were a mentor for you, but 3 most important artists in terms of your development as a professional.
I would say Pink Floyd, who put out one of the best albums that I've ever heard in my life, which is Dark Side of the Moon. KRS-One, because he is the most thought-provoking hip-hop artist of his generation. And people are kind of like putting out a lot of different stuff. His rhymes were always very thought-provoking and kind of like made you think in terms of like, yeah, this is really good, I really like it, but it's also educating. And lastly, I would say Gorilla Biscuits, because they're just always going to be one of my favorite hardcore bands, and something that I always kind of like turn to put on whenever I need a little bit of motivation.
Oh yeah, those are great answers, man. Well done. Okay, everyone, as we're closing off, you know, Chad, really want to thank you for your time. This was one that I was looking forward to a lot, and I know scheduling was a bit tough on our end because just it's been a crazy time. Dude, I would love, and I'm already thinking about it. There are a few people that are in our age brackets who have kind of like been like, oh, well, what am I going to do next? And some of them are people that, you know, I think there'd be like real value once you've landed in your next thing. We talk about that, like, well, how did you do it? Like, you know, that kind of like gray area where you're like, you leave your thing, but you don't know what else. Cause you know, a lot of professionals, myself included, have had that moment of like, oh shit, now what do I do? And I really would love to have a conversation with you and a few other people about like, and this is how I got to that next thing.
I'm down. I'll let you know.
Awesome, man. All right, everyone, we'll see you in the outro. And Spencer, drop the beat. What?